Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ventures Podcast. I'm excited about today's episode with Andy Chatham. He is the founder of DIMO, which is Digital Infrastructure for Moving Objects. And they're starting with vehicles. You can have a device or log in with your app on your car and get connected to this open network where developers and all kinds of people are creating incentives and new value creation for mobile data, for your mobility. So if you're listening to this episode, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com. There we'll have more extensive show notes and also the video. There's some interesting screenshots and screen sharing that Andy does in this episode that you can watch. But if you're already watching it, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures and it should show up. And in this show, we've really focused the last 40 episodes or so on Web3 and why Web3 matters and different stories and use cases around why this is actually important for the future of humanity. So this is actually a really cool story for something that most of us interact with every day, i.e. our cars and vehicles, for how the future is going to look as we interact with our data. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Andy Chatham. All right, Andy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Will.
So I'm excited about this conversation because last 40 episodes or so, we've looked at various different angles of Web3, and it's still, a lot of the audience still don't quite have enough stories in their minds around why it matters and why it's so enormously cool and good for the world. So I love your story because it's actually taking something that we all use or interact with every day and think about bringing data to life in an extremely clever way and then leveraging Web3 with it. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about your background and kind of what you're up to, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So I've spent about 10 years in the mobility space, and I'll give you a quick bit of context on what that means. I started my career working on a project that spun out of Zappos.com in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And the CEO, the late Tony Hsieh, was a very forward-thinking guy and really saw a lot of the changes that were coming down in the mobility world around electric, automated, shared mobility, and decided to invest and create a company that was basically attached to a real estate development that he was working on. And we ended up building one of the first Tesla superchargers. We launched the company that actually ended up becoming Jump Bikes in Las Vegas. At the time, they were called Social Bicycles. And we created a fleet of shared Teslas and electric vehicles that were accessible to people under a membership program. And Cool. This was all back in 2012. So one of those things that was way, way early for its time. But it got me exposed to all these cool ideas. And we had a bunch of really awesome, smart people come and visit Las Vegas and see what we were building. And one of them took me aside and said, "Hey, I think you guys are maybe 5 or 10 years too early with this, but if you want to know how these things work at scale, you can come work for Transdev, which is a large mobility services company." And eventually I decided to take him up on that and spent almost 8 years working on public transit systems, also building software and products to help them compete with Uber and Lyft in the ride hailing market, and eventually wound up building a pretty large portion of the business in North America focused on operating autonomous vehicle systems. So as a mobility services company, our focus was not on creating the core AV technology, but helping it scale from science project to a piece of transportation infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And so that got me really close to the metal in terms of where that technology was, not just automation, but connected vehicle technology. And a lot of these vehicles are electrified as well. And exposed a bunch of the problems that they were going to have scaling up. And that led me through a friend to connect with our CTO, Yev, who was building connected vehicle products and services for the autonomous vehicle space, but also had worked with many of the large OEMs, started his career at OnStar, and really had spent nearly a decade thinking about connected vehicle technology. And we started working together, doing some consulting projects here and there, sort of thinking about the space. And one of the key insights that formed DIMO was starting to work hands-on with the Helium network and realizing that this, sort of Web3 cryptocurrency thing that everybody had been talking about, that I've been following for years, had really started to catalyze around some actual use cases, and those use cases were tangible, like real world things. They were building this huge IoT network and incentivizing people to do so, and with a token that they had created, and that was something that really got us thinking as we were using it about building a connected vehicle network that was token incentivized and incorporated a lot of the good building blocks that Helium had created, both from like a governance and incentives perspective, but also from a technology perspective. And so last summer we got to the point where we were looking at this, and Yev was still like interested in what we were building, but not fully committed as a full-time member of the project. And eventually we got to the point where we were like, this is the thing that we kind of want to go all in on. We found a hardware partner that was basically already making the hardware device that we needed, and we started to put together the pieces for what became DIMO today, and we're a little bit less than a year into building this project full time, and have been able to create something that thousands of people are already connected to, and there's a really clear path to getting it up to the scale of millions of vehicles or hundreds of millions of vehicles, which is really what we think we need in order to make the impact that we want. And I'm happy to kind of like dive in on that and sort of the longer term vision. But the core idea is an open IoT platform starting with cars, and we're building a number of ways for people to connect their vehicles to DIMO and start sharing data from the cars. And then on the other side, we're building a developer platform that lets people build everything from smarter insurance products to better vehicle commerce and finance solutions to games and enthusiast products. And so that's kind of what we've set off on, and have been fortunate to attract a lot of really smart people to the team. So we have about 20 people building the project on the core team today, and maybe another 30 or so that are like waking up every day and thinking about it, who work at other companies and are building different pieces of the stack. So yeah,
Awesome.
it's been a busy year.
Sounds like it. Okay, so fundamentally, with your car, there's the port on your car, right? I mean, you think
Mhm.
about it, the car, the amount of data, your location, the number of miles, the different aspects of what's going on with the car, et cetera, et cetera. It sounds like you built this device. Can you tell us about this device that plugs in, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a whole category of like aftermarket electronics for vehicles that we think is actually quite a bit bigger than most people realize,
Mm,
and is one of the key pieces that we saw develop in the last couple of years that we couldn't build what we're building without. So there's always the question of like, why now? Like, why can you build this like open token incentivized network now? And there's like a lot of crypto building blocks, like more people have wallets, but on the hardware side, um, there's a device like this. We have a partner, AutoPi, which is our first hardware partner in the ecosystem, and they had created this device that is based on the Raspberry Pi, so it's very cheap, like commodity components inside of it. They put a cell radio on it, so it can plug in and just connect to the internet right away. And it plugs into what's called the onboard diagnostics port in the car, which is federally mandated in the U.S. and in Europe as well. So basically, every car made after '94, I think, has one.
mm.
Explicitly, we support the last 10 years of vehicles because that just simplifies things down for the beginning, but eventually it will be
Sure.
open to any car, and it won't just be restricted to that port as far as how vehicles are able to connect. So we also have software integrations with vehicles that already have internet connections. So today, if you have a Tesla or a newer model Ford or GM vehicle, and in addition to lots of others, you can just log in with the same login that you have for your vehicle app, and we'll start to be able to pull data from your vehicle. It's very similar to like connecting your bank account with Plaid. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so our goal on the sort of like supply side of the network is to make it as easy as possible for people to connect their vehicles, whether that's with hardware, which has some advantages, it supports every car, and is much more like private and user owned, or the existing connection on vehicles, which allows people to get started really quickly. And so we've taken the time to kind of like get all of those pieces right, and the next phase is really going to be increasing the number of things that people can actually do with that data. And one of the big missing pieces from the market is a developer platform for cars, right? So all of
Mm-hmm.
the OEMs are making their own like walled garden developer platforms, but the thing about the automotive market is that Toyota is the biggest OEM in the world, and they have 15% of cars on the road,
Mm.
and they have 6 different connected vehicle platforms that they're using to connect those vehicles to the internet. So it's incredibly fragmented, and
Yeah.
we've been able to sort of like aggregate and bundle up connectivity options. And we think that's going to be much more compelling for developers, and have seen a lot of people already sort of start to reach out and say like, hey, I love what you're building. It seems like it's so much more aligned with what I want to create. And I
Yeah.
don't want to go talk to 10 different OEMs to
Right.
be able to go build my smart insurance app or
Right.
vehicle commerce app. And so, yeah, that's kind of the
And
route
that's really
we're taking now.
that's really the future. The future is we're pumping out all this data all the time. And Web 2, we send all our data to Facebook and et cetera, and
Yep.
then they turned us into the product, and they monetize
Yep.
it, and they all got really rich, and then we got mental health issues, and that was basically the exchange of value. So the future is, hey, we're pumping out all this data, even if we're driving around in our car, that's our data.
Yeah.
Not only should it be open and free and allow developer platforms, et cetera, but there actually could be a way that we could get paid for sharing our data with the world. And that's the ownership and the economic incentives create all kinds of interesting future opportunities.
Yeah. And I'll make that a little bit more tangible too. So the
Yeah.
initial use case that we were building around was collecting verified data streams about electric vehicle battery performance. And we had a client that approached us and said, we think that certain OEMs are lying about the quality of batteries that they're putting in their cars. And there have been all these recalls, and tens of billions of dollars are getting invested into new battery chemistries. And there's basically no ground truth data about how those things are performing, other than sort of reactive stuff, like when you have a big recall, or if you go interview somebody at like a maintenance facility and say, how are these new Tesla batteries performing? And so we took that and we said, hey, that's very interesting. We could incentivize people to plug these devices into their car, and this is something that, as long as we have willing buyers on the other side, like, you could pay people for that. And so that was kind of the first use case. But since then, and fleshing that out more, like, we're certainly going to be, in the next couple of months, we're going to announce the first couple of partners that are going to be like signed up to actually be on the other side purchasing the data from users. But ultimately, what we think is more interesting is empowering developers, right? And like, just selling your data is never going to get you that much, unless you're like giving something else up in exchange, maybe. But really, what we want is to make the data more accessible to people who are going to create value-added services for people. So we look at like the smart insurance market, all these dongles that people are plugging into their cars, and we think we can build a much better version of that product that's more competitive and able to return a lot of the sort of take rates of the existing marketplaces back to users, because they're ultimately the source of the data.
Yes.
And so, our approach is much more focused on like empowering developers. And if somebody shows up and says, I want to pay you, $10 a month for data from Tesla, it's like, of course, I think a lot of our users would probably be very into that. But what we really like is when somebody says, I think I can create an app that will help your average user get $1,000 more when they go to sell their car. And that's something where we're like, okay, well, there's a really compelling value case for that, because then it turns the sort of DIMO experience into something that you would be crazy not to do with your car. And that's where we're headed. And so, we've really developed this much more like nuanced and focused view on how data monetization actually works. And we think there's like a 1 + 1 = 3 situation when you're helping developers and users monetize it.
That's it. Yeah. Okay. So earlier, since most people just listen on their podcast player, which is totally fine. Earlier on the video, you showed a little black device, right? That plugs in. Tell us about that device and maybe describe it for people. And obviously,
Sure.
anybody listening to this, you can just go to wclittle.com and you can watch this video and you can see it. And I'll put the links also in the show notes.
Yep.
So you can check out this thing. But can you describe for those just listening, what is this? Is it available? Tell us more about it.
Yeah. So we've delivered a few hundred of these to paying customers already. We've sold about 4,400 of them in a pre-sale, and unfortunately, I've been dealing with like crazy supply chain issues. We moved all of our manufacturing from China to the EU. And we're getting ready to, in the next month, really ramp up fulfillment on these devices, which is something we're super excited about, because it's basically like the easiest way to connect a car that doesn't have an internet connection to the internet. And the vision for this particular device is sort of like a Fitbit for your car, And that's very much what the product reflects today. So I'll show you a little bit of data that I'm getting from my vehicle. And this is something that people can go to the video stream and check out, or even better, just add your car to DIMO and you'll be able to get it. Um, and yeah, so the early version of the product, and I'm showing just the web version. We have a much more well-designed mobile version. It gives you all the data about how much you're driving. This is my particular vehicle. You can see me here in Providence, Rhode Island, and the range of the car, and how well I'm charging it. We also put privacy in the hands of the user, so you can set areas where you don't want your data collected, in addition to areas where you
Right.
do want your data
Right.
collected. And then we've built it to support fleets, right? So you can have as many vehicles as you want in your garage, and ultimately, we're going to be adding a ton more features. If you go into the mobile app today, you can see things like you can add documents to what we're calling the glove box that allow you to add your title, registration, insurance information.
Oh, cool.
All these things are going to be sort of like building blocks for third-party apps that can come in and basically offer you services. And we don't want it to feel like a sort of like Google or Facebook experience where you're constantly being advertised at. We want these to all be things that you're, kind of opting into and have the tools to very seamlessly start using, right? So the hardware device is a way for people to, today you buy it, it comes with connectivity, you plug it in right out of the box, it turns on, you pair it. And as you drive, we'll be able to sort of surface insights for you about how your car is performing, pull error codes from the engine, tell you if your tire's flat, a lot of these sort of basic connected vehicle functionalities, but then, over time, expose services and partners that might be very helpful for you when you go to sell your car, or if you're looking for insurance. Everybody's insurance premiums are probably going up like 30 to 40% this year. So that's, something that a lot of users have started to ask us about. And so, yeah, it's kind of one entry point into the DIMO ecosystem. And our goal, and one thing that we've been very clear about, is that the hardware connectivity is going to be open over time. So very similar to how Helium approached their hardware ecosystem, although I think we're going to have a little bit more like control and certification of new manufacturers. There will be lots of different categories of devices that you can use to connect your car. And one cool thing about the AutoPi, I'll show you here if you're on video, is that it has a lot of ports, right? So you can attach a screen to it. It has a USB
cool.
port, so you can attach a Helium mapper, which is something that you can use to like basically verify connectivity to the Helium network or other decentralized wireless networks. And then it also has a Wi-Fi hotspot in it that we'll be able to turn on and add a subscription to. So if you want to use your device as a hotspot and have the ability to go on your laptop in the car, or the kids on the iPad in the back, there's going to be all these like value added things that can add on over time. So yeah, the hardware ecosystem is like very nascent right now, but we have had some really interesting folks show up and say, hey, I want to build a next generation DIMO device. I'm already creating a smaller dongle like this one, or a dash cam, or this big like backup battery that you can store in your trunk that has all these other features. And so we're going to kind of open it up and let people build whatever they want.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So now the incentives for the people to just buy this device and use it is they can get better access to their data. They can see the things. It might actually have impact on their insurance premiums, maybe their resale value. So there's all these and it's just kind of a neat way to connect to the world, and you'll have all these gamified things, et cetera, et cetera. And then the incentives for the developers, right? Why would I build a hardware or a software on this platform? Like tell us more about the developer incentives.
So we're really focused on making it as easy as possible for developers to create something on DIMO. And what that's going to look like early on is just a lot of like bridges into existing services. So there's a ton of existing like huge services companies that are like offering people a better deal if they refinance their car, or maintenance networks like get your tires changed here, or insurance products. And being able to sort of surface users that are at the right point in their vehicle ownership journey for these people is certainly something that we've thought a lot about. And basically we want to kind of like turn the tables on those companies, and rather than like forcing them to advertise at people in a way that is not very user friendly, we want to sort of like have all these data driven decisions available to users in the app, or in third party apps using the data that they already have collected. And so for developers, the compelling use cases, in a lot of cases, these markets can be made much more efficient with the data that we already have. And they haven't been able to access data from vehicles without either A, producing their own hardware device, like the insurance companies have, or B, going to car companies and saying, we would like to buy the data from you, not from the user. And car companies are already selling data to insurance companies or to who are like, I don't know, one of them has a big partnership with Palantir that we're like, super interested in figuring out what's going on there.
Yeah, seriously, people.
So like, our approach is we're going to get the data from the source because, users are ultimately the source of the data. They own the car. And then we're going to provide them with the ability to opt into apps very easily that, rather than say like having to go to Carvana and type in your VIN number and tell us about the condition of your car, you could just see like Carvana as an option in the DIMO app store and say like, yes, I would like to get a quote for me selling my vehicle right now. And we already have all of the data about the car and we can send it to Carvana, the minimum amount necessary to share with them to get you back a quote and have you transact with them. And the way that fits into the token model, or at least like kind of how we're thinking about things at this point, nothing is really set in stone as far as that's concerned, is that the token will be kind of like a reward point for when you transact in the marketplace, or there's also like kind of a baseline issuance component to this. When you transact in the marketplace, any commissions that are generated by the DIMO platform or any integration with a third party are converted to the token and returned to the user. So it's kind of like a reward point on an airline, where if you spend more money, then you're able to capture the value of that back, or at least some of the value or take rate of the marketplace in the form of this token asset that also is issued to you for providing data to the platform in the first place. So there's 3 or 4 different applications that are going to be ready to launch in the fall that will allow users to either like directly monetize their data if they want, or to opt in to goods and services with partners that also allow them to basically capture the value of their transaction via the token as well.
Sweet. All right. So token models is it's a fun subject on this show, because there's lots of different types of tokens and lots of different types of models.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about? Let's just start with the basics. What types of tokens? I know you said nothing set in stone, but even to pontificate a little bit here, what types of tokens do you think will be available in your ecosystem?
Yeah, so we've provided a design that we're still kind of like taking feedback on and iterating on with the community and a lot of the early supporters of the project, who are luckily mostly people that have like already thought about this quite a bit because they've interacted with Helium and Pollen and all these other decentralized networks. And there's 2 digital assets that are going to be core parts of the DIMO ecosystem. One of them already exists actually, and you can use the early version of it today in the app. It allows you to mint your vehicle ID. We call it claiming your vehicle ID. So when you add a car, each car has its own unique identity out in the real world. It's typically called a VIN number. Rather than using that, we create an address for the vehicle on chain. It's actually represented as an NFT, which it's not something that we like put in front of users or try to have them need to understand, but that's kind of like the gateway into creating the on-chain identity for your vehicle. And there's some steps associated with connecting your car that allow you to prove like, I own this thing, I have access to it, whether it's plugging a hardware device in or connecting the software connection. And so that allows you to kind of have your identity for your asset. And then the DIMO token itself is meant to sort of reflect the value exchange, whether it's you sharing data into the ecosystem or buying goods and services and getting it as kind of like a rebate or a reward point is sort of the vision there. And so yeah, all of this stuff is generally in design, but has been so for about 10 months or so, and we've been able to really iterate on it and look at a lot of what else is going on out in the world and create a model that we think is really safe enough to try. And so up until this point, we've been kind of using, if you go into the app today, you'll see reward points. And those are, purely for the testnet period of the project when, we've connected a few thousand cars. We have about 30,000 cars waiting in the wings, like either for a hardware device because they can't connect today. And so that's allowed us to really like iterate on the model and make sure that we're providing the right incentives to people. And then the other side of the coin is making sure that people are not gaming the system and figuring out how to like create fake cars that send us fake data.
Right.
And that's something that we've put quite a bit of time and effort into, and have been able to learn a lot from watching other networks. Because as soon as there's any incentive for people to do
I know,
something,
seriously.
it's going to get gamed.
Like the car
Yeah.
Sybil attack kind of thing. In fact, actually, it's a good question. How can you, there's sort of like this proof of humanity identity thing going on. How do you
Yeah.
do proof of vehicle? How do you actually know that that is a unique vehicle? How are you and others solving that problem?
There's two core ways that we layer on protections, and our approach is, we've been around it for long enough to know that you can never make something perfectly secure or perfectly,
Sure.
you can make it sufficiently expensive for somebody to try to game the system.
Mm.
And cars are nice because they already have an identity, right? So each car has a VIN number and sort of a fingerprint that's associated with that vehicle. And so we've built in a number of protections and basically like checks to make sure that the vehicle that somebody's adding is the car that they say it is. And when you connect, whether it's plugging in the hardware device or linking the software connection, that provides us with additional data points that say like, hey, okay, the OEM says that this is the same car that you said it is. So we know that there's like, at
Oh,
least,
okay. So
you
you're
would have to
taking
go
you're
and hack
taking
the
it into the
OEM and
database.
produce
Yeah.
a fake result from their API in order to get that. And so that's something that we feel pretty good about. And then on the hardware side, we've developed a technology that we're calling proof of movement that allows us to basically layer on data sources that show this thing, whether it's a car or another IoT device, has moved between this point and this point on the surface of the earth at this time.
Mm.
And there's a bunch of stuff that we do. So one of the core components of that is this is a hardware wallet. So one of the core hardware changes that we made to the hardware device is putting a secure element on it, which allows you to put a wallet on the device that signs the data as it's collected
Oh,
and sends it up. And then we also use, at least today, we're using Twilio super sims in the cell connectivity for the device. So that gives us some data about the cell tower that the vehicle is talking to as it's driving around. So if you drive for 10 miles, typically you'll switch between one cell tower and another. And that gives us another layer of protection to make sure that you're not just like plugging in a bunch of these hardware devices in a data center somewhere and replay attacking and basically sending us fake data. And you would have to then go hack Twilio. You would have to hack the OEM of the vehicle. And we think that's, pretty
yeah, that's pretty
secure
good.
as far as that goes. And then there's a lot of other really interesting things that we can do in later stages that are maybe a little bit too nerdy to get into right now, but we've spent long enough thinking about this to convince ourselves that this is something that, at least the average user it's going to be way out of reach for that type of person to be able
Yeah.
to fake. And then there'll be some pretty strong anti-gaming protections in place, and that's something that Helium has had to deal quite a bit with. And so that there's some really good examples of how that can work in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm a big believer, as are most listeners of the show, in just getting data in the back into the hands of the people,
Mm-hmm.
that we, the people, can collectively decide what to do with it. Have our developers get algorithms for us that we can opt into, et cetera, et cetera. Tell us about the vision that you see, right? What is the future orientation of when what you're building is wildly successful? It's enabling what for humanity? Like what's that future state that you're looking forward to?
So Yev and I both came out of and have spent some time in the autonomous vehicle space
Mm,
and saw how that technology is being developed.
mm,
And it largely mirrors how connected vehicle technology has been developed up to this point, but obviously with different actors, right? So everybody's approach for building an AV up to this point has been like, get $10 billion and hire as many smart people as you can and say, make this thing work. And in the process of doing that, they build this very vertically integrated system, right? Where Cruise or Waymo are building an entire robo-taxi service or automated trucking service that they completely control every layer of. And now that they're getting up to scale and they have hundreds of these things on the road, they're realizing that people don't really trust them, right? And you've
Mm,
seen all these incidents in the newspaper. If you read the
mm.
Wall Street Journal, there's been a couple of like front page articles in the last few weeks about like, hey, there's this automated trucking company that just like slammed into the median on a highway and nobody knows why. And we asked the company and they said it wasn't their fault, it was the driver's fault. And we asked the driver, and the driver said that the software was on and there was a bug and it smashed into the median. And so we looked at that a couple years ago and said, this is never going to work, right? Like you need to have a trust layer built into that where data from these connected vehicles can be syndicated out to insurance companies, to operators, to the government, maybe even, and regulations can be a lot more, you know, effectively put into software rather than kind of like arbitrarily the result of some investigation or reactive to situations. And so we look at what we're building long term as a way to enable a lot of those interactions to happen in a much more like sane and rational way, with the user at the center of everything rather than just being sort of like a consideration after the fact, like some drone sitting in the backseat paying for things. um, and we think that this is something that people are going to demand, right? And the airline industry went through something very similar when there were all these plane crashes, and people were like, "We need to put a black box on the plane." And like,
Mm,
Boeing can't be making the black box on the plane, right? Like, it needs to be like independently, sort of separated out. And in that case, like the
ah,
government got quite involved. But in our case, we think that, and we've talked with a lot of AV companies who have said like, this type of black box product is something that we know we're going to need. We're just not even at the point like where it can scale, or the existing thing that we're trying to create is at enough scale. But I think some of them are starting to realize that now. And that's kind of where we see the value of this data being something that's like interesting and like moderately helpful for people to going to like, this is like existential and like society needs this.
mm.
And and so that's really what we're building towards from both a hardware and software perspective. And we think we have a way to really like bootstrap a huge community of people that care about stuff today, but then have them realize like, okay, well, in order for these like automated technologies to work and for me to feel comfortable having one in my car, I also want my own record of what happened. And that's what we're starting to create. And we have some test vehicles with automated driving systems in them today that we're collecting data from, and like that's going to inform a lot of future product development, and is something that's kind of non-obvious about what we're building today that we think is going to be pretty clear as day in a couple of years.
Wow. Okay. So ultimately, it's safety. It's keeping car OEMs accountable. It's surfacing ability for economic incentives or cost savings for people, and really just mobility in general. Right? You can almost think of it as this is a justice issue. If we have more access for more people to be able to have control over their data and control over their movement and who sees that and how they interact with their community around it. I don't know. Is there anything else you'd add to that, just to sort of recap the kind of the essence of why humanity needs this?
We A lot of people look at what we're doing and say that there's a very like antagonistic approach towards OEMs, or they're like, oh, like GM is really going to hate this, or Ford is going to not like this, what you're building. But we think that ultimately it is going to be viewed as something that's quite good for certainly the legacy OEMs that are out there, and folks who just want to focus on building a really good product.
Mm,
And in their case, it's a hardware product, right? Like OEM software companies are not, or Ford, as much as they would like to be, is not a software company. And
right,
they've spent
right.
billions of dollars trying to become one. And it might be better off in the future, if they said, we're going to create like the endpoints for this vehicle, but ultimately sell it to somebody and allow them to, kind of like a computer, figure out what operating system they want to put on it, or at least
Mm.
like, where the data goes when it leaves the car. And so,
Yeah.
we think what we're building is going to be really helpful for OEMs that are very user focused, because their options today, and mostly the digital access to the vehicle for users with newer cars, is mitigated already by Apple and Android, right? So like most people are like, just give me CarPlay, right? I just want to plug in my phone to the car and have my Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever show up. And we think in the future, as the connectivity and the automation in vehicles, and certainly with electric cars, like being connected is more important. Like we want to create an alternative that looks much more like Linux than it does like iOS. And there's an opportunity for OEMs that want to create very user-focused products to sort of get on board with that vision. And so what we're building and our approach has really generally been like, let's try to solve user problems first. And we know down the line, like there's going to be this whole question of how do OEMs either support this or get on board with it, or maybe they'll try to like, fight it. And we think that you're going to be on the right side of you're going to be on the right side of history if you're providing people with access to their own information and you're giving them products and services that are the best deal. And so, ultimately, like, I think we're going to create this sort of like, game theory where it makes a lot of sense for an OEM to like opt in and support something like what we're doing, because it's going to create a better product for their end user. And they're going to have access to like hundreds of thousands of developers versus having to create everything themselves. And so, yeah, that's kind of the reasoning behind a lot of the strategy around what we're doing.
Got it. Very cool. Very cool. All right. So what's a good call to action? Can they get on some kind of wait lists for when it's more available? What should the listeners, the viewers of this show do next to get in the game?
Yeah. So you can, if you have a Tesla or a new model for GM, we support about 300 different makes and models of vehicles without any hardware right out of the box. If you have an active internet subscription, connectivity subscription for your vehicle, you can likely log in using the DIMO app. If you go to the App Store, the Android Google Play Store, just search DIMO and it'll pop up. And so you can connect your car today and start collecting your data. The best day to do that is today. And so the longer history you have, the more valuable your data will be over time. And you'll also be able to earn reward points, which will eventually convert into kind of the network as a whole. And so that's a big sort of actionable thing that people can do. If you don't have a car, there's a really active community of people that are doing everything from like designing apps on top of the platform to, in a lot of cases, people are reverse engineering signals that are coming from the CAN bus of the car to be able to add more functionality to DIMO. That's something that's pretty cool that's going on around the project. And then, yeah, if you want to stay involved, we are going to be opening up hardware sales again once we deliver more of the pre-sale units, which is starting to ramp up in August. And so that'll be an opportunity for folks that don't have a car that can connect to start using DIMO. And you can follow us on social. We're at DIMO_network on Twitter and all the other ones.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, Andy, this has been incredible. I'm excited to follow along progress. Yeah, very, very, very interesting project that you're working on. And I'm excited to be able to share this out and tell everyone about it.
Thanks. Yeah, we have a great team of people working on this. And I'm just sort of the person that gets to go around and tell everybody else about it. But yeah, if you're interested, feel free to reach out and I can kind of direct you to the right place in the project.
Love it. All right.
Thanks, Will.
Well, really appreciate your time. All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it would be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.